even though I had been in the seminary for several years by then, when it came down to actually making those promises to be celibate for the rest of my life, promises to be ordained a priest for the rest of my life, I got some mighty cold feet. Just before I stood before the world and made that commitment, even though I had thought about it, I had looked at it, I had worked on it for a long time, I was scared. I was scared that I couldn't do it. I'm too weak, I thought. How do I know I can do something like this for the rest of my life? I've never done anything for the rest of my life. And how do I take something like a commitment for a whole lifetime, and keep it from degrading into monotony and boredom and lifelessness? That was a huge also fear of mine at the time. How do I do anything forever? How do I be faithful for what could end up being 69 years? I was only 27 years old. I've never done anything for 69 years. How do I know if I can do that? There was just not a small amount of anxiety, I have to say, in my question. And one afternoon, I was walking on the first floor of the seminary, and I walked past an old nun. She had taught me liturgy for a few years while I was there in the seminary. And she asked, how was I doing? And I told her. Her response? She shared a concept written about by a great Catholic existentialist. It was the idea of creative fidelity. Creative fidelity. And I have to tell you, I look back on that chance encounter in the hallway on the way to a class as a moment of pure grace in my life. Those two words, creative fidelity, came together for me, and they began to define, and still define, the next 38 years of my life. To this day. Creative fidelity. It was Gabriel Marcel's solution to the problem of time and of change in human relationships, and how faithfulness could ever be possible, given that everything and everybody changes all the time. In a nutshell, creative fidelity says that I create my faithfulness as I go. I create my faithfulness as I go. And I have to tell you, starting to see it like this, faithfulness for these 38 years has been anything but boring and humdrum and deadening. We create our faithfulness as we go. For example, the man who made his wedding vows is not the man he is today. Today he is so much more experienced, more knowledgeable, more mature, hopefully healthier and freer than he was back then, perhaps even wiser. Now he has different interests and occupations. And his spouse, his wife, has changed too, in all those same ways over those same years, and changed significantly. Why should these older, wiser persons, who are now healthier and freer, be bound by promises they made when they were younger and more foolish people, when they were people who in some ways don't even really exist anymore? How does that work? But I'm sure it ought to be able to. That's what vow means, doesn't it? But how can that work? How does commitment commitment to another human being or to anything in life not become deadening? How does it become more than just sort of this grit your teeth and be loyal thing? That was my fear. That was my challenge. Creative fidelity is the willingness to trust, to be constantly attentive to, and suffer with the other, even though both of us are changing all the time, and so is the whole world around us. This is not the world I was ordained into 38 years ago. It's so different. This is not the church I was ordained into 38 years ago. It's so different. This is not the man who laid on the floor of that cathedral just a little bit east of us and gave his life to the church. I'm so different than I was then. I had meniscus in those days. But what I've come to see, and I hope some of you who are engaged in these commitments and the rest of you who are still afraid to make them, I hope you can see that what I've come to see about faithfulness is that this is a really living process. This is a living process. What I heard that sister say to me on that first floor of the seminary that afternoon was, Gary, you only have to be faithful in the moment. You only have to be faithful in the moment. You only have to be faithful right now. You only have to be faithful today. You only have to reach out to that hand that's reaching out to you in need right now and grab a hold of it. This is a living process. On that thought, my life changed as if on a dime. How then be faithful? How be full of faith and keep faith? This homily, like any other homily, is really not a computer. You press the right button and out pops this response that tells you just the right answer. I didn't come to you this morning with a hat full of answers. I simply submit to you that the readings you just heard proclaimed suggest how today's faithful can work out their faithfulness. Today's readings suggest that today's faithful can indeed, and do it vitally and with passion all the days of their life, they can work out their faithfulness. This can work for us. We learn it from the faithful wife in Proverbs, and we learn it from the three traders in the story Jesus tells in the gospel. From them we learn what it means to be faithful. This is such a real gift in a very unfaithful world. Do you see, my friends, that fidelity is where you are? Faithfulness is right here and right now for you. The wife of Proverbs, she wasn't peering over the hills to distant Syria. She was not planning on how to be faithful in her old age. That's where I got trapped in fear. I kept looking to the future, and how do you do this? And how do you make this work for all these years when everything's changing? That's where I got stuck before I made that promise. But that faithful wife, that faithful woman, she understood. She understood that fidelity is right here, feeding the hand, reaching out to you for food, helping the child whose hand is reaching out to you for help right now when it's reaching out to reach back. That's faithfulness. Faithfulness was husband and children, servants and merchants, the poor, and God for her. To each of these she had pledged herself, and she was a woman of her word. Listen to how Proverbs talks about her. This is the kind of woman, it says, who her husband can entrust his heart to. She has an unfailing prize. She brings him good, not evil, all the days of her life, all the days of her life. But then look at it's in the moment. She obtains wool and flax. She works with her hands. She puts her hand to the distaff. Her fingers ply the spindle. She reaches out her hands to the poor. She extends her arms to the needy. Everything else passes. But this is the reward. This is fidelity. It's just that nitty-gritty. As for her, so for you, so for me. Fidelity is here and now. Faithfulness is November 2014. Who and what have I pledged myself to? I only have to live this day doing that, loving this other as Christ has loved me. Mark and Becca, as all you know who are parents, their life has changed dramatically in the last couple months. The sleep they used to get, now broken by wails of tears and arms flailing, reaching out for some sort of attention or change diapers. Not sleeping when she moves back home after college because she doesn't have a job. And then laying awake wondering if she's in some ditch somewhere because she didn't call to tell that she was okay. It just changes all the time, doesn't it? But it's still the same sort of thing. Everything's different for Mark and Becca now as parents. You know that, as do I, in a different way. But through their faithfulness to her now and the rest of their lives, they're going to make visible for her a very faithful God. A very faithful God. I may have made commitments 37 years ago now, but honestly, I had no idea what the world or the church would look like in 2014. I could not have known what life was going to be like in my future at that time at all. I could not know the issues that would plague the church. I could not know the scandals that would surface in the priesthood right around my 25th anniversary. I could not know the different popes, the vast array of popes that I've had over these 38 years. I didn't know who would be leading, who would be my bishop, who would be anything for me. I did not know if Christ was going to ask me to surrender in the moment at any given time, nor does anyone who makes any vow or any promise ever concerning the rest of their lives. And what's more, my presence here to you this morning is a fresh and a free commitment to you because I love you. I'm not here because I was supposed to be. I'm here because I love you, and I love you right now, and I love you enough to hobble around and embarrass myself in front of you. And I hope I always do. But all I know is I made that choice today. Today was the test of my fidelity, not the rest of my life. And being creatively faithful to you, the church, means that I've got to figure out now in my life how to respond to you best now in my life, who are different from me and still coming into being like I am. That's the challenge of commitment. Right here, right now, the alarm clock going off this morning. And that, my friends, that is what keeps us passionate and fresh in this lifelong thing. Passionate and fresh. And what I've learned is that keeping commitments from being anything but is about being anything but passionless and boring. Not even a little. In the old days, I couldn't do anything for an hour without getting bored. But I have to tell you in the end, the reward. The reward is what I long to hear from my Lord. This is probably the medication. You guys, when it comes to our last breath on our last day, what I long to hear is the way that gospel just ended. And what I long for you to hear is what you just heard at the end of that gospel, where God will meet you and say to you, well done, my good and faithful servant. Now enter into the joy of your master. To hear that is heaven enough for me.